I'm here in South Korea. Welcome to a very interesting place in Seoul. I brought you here because I want to tell you something very important. I think this was perhaps one of the most consequential decisions of my life for my personal happiness that I took 2 years ago. All of this behind me used to be a highway, and Seoul decided to transform it into what we call natural infrastructure, a natural corridor that would lower the temperatures in the summer, but also connect the different corridors of winds and green spaces in the city. An example of how to restore natural spaces and fight urban heat island. But this is not why I brought you here. I want to start a new series on the importance of journaling. I think this is perhaps the most important and interesting part of my channel about self-discovery. So I want to share with you the joy of journaling, why it's so incredibly useful, and how you can use it to know yourself better and to celebrate life in all its forms, from the mundane to exceptional. I've been journaling almost every day since 2023, with very small exceptions. I know how important journaling has been to me to understand myself, to understand my values, and to get through my lowest low. So I want to start sharing from this experience because I think journaling has helped me uncover some shared human experiences that you guys might find yourself in. So how did it all start? It started with yet another fancy journal with beautiful covers. But that January was different, and I internally decided that I'm going to get myself to do it every day and that there's no going back. I wanted to use journaling both as a way to better understand myself, but also to build the identity of a writer. Because back then I was reading this book called Atomic Habits, and there was something really interesting that I read in it, which is you are a collection of your habits. We are what we do. So because I want to become a writer, you can only be so if you start writing. So I wanted to use journaling as a way to reflect on my everyday life and as a tool to turn the writing identity into a reality. And I think we can truly understand ourselves to the extent to which we can look inwardly and put in words our feelings. That's also the reason why I kept my journal in English, because most of my experiences these days are lived in English. So most of my emotional world is structured in English. So how was it at first? It was difficult and awkward. Most people I know, they are stopped from journaling every day because they think that their life is not worth being recorded, that nothing interesting enough happens in a day to be recorded. Well, back then I was living a pretty boring life in Paris, sure, but I was working 5 days remotely, disconnected from my colleagues, disconnected from my friends, and pretty disconnected from my purpose. So during those days, I was living one of the lowest lows of my life. So you can imagine there was also little to talk about for most part of my days. However, I told myself two things. First, I will write whatever comes to my mind about the day, no matter how ridiculous it sounds or how insignificant it appears, and without trying to fill in the page. No matter how little I have to say about the day, I'm just gonna write that down. Second, I will write about how I feel, to be honest and straightforwardly acknowledge the state of my mind at the end of that day. And in order to get myself to understand what I was feeling and be more nuanced than your typical good and bad type of adjectives and dichotomies, I decided to print this page of vocabulary for emotions, and I would just pick 2 or 3 emotions that really describe how I felt that day. There's a, yeah, there was a duck there. She is probably interested in journaling too. In fact, this is what I wrote in my journal back then, on my first day. I bought this agenda to store within some of the burning ideas pumping everywhere in my mind. It's time to process things. Then I added this interesting paragraph that I had read that day, which said, naming our emotions can help create a little space between our emotions and our actions. And then, as a personal reflection about the day, I said, today I had a conversation about the need to dumb myself down. Exactly, dumb myself down. Because as we all come to realize, the smarter you are in this world, sometimes the more disillusion you grow with it. The next day, I had a small reflection about how my idea of success was changing and evolving. And the day after that, I was finding myself shocked at being tired of going to a party and needing to socialize, because that was very different, very surprising to a person who loves spending time with people, to realize that I was so exhausted of getting out of my shell. So, all of this in hindsight sounds so wise to me these days, right? I feel as if it was such an important process of understanding myself. Now, over the 2 years, a lot of personal wisdom and reflections about life have accumulated on those pages. It almost feels like my personal history, a monography. So, why I think everyone needs to journal? It's because, number one, like I said, you get to know yourself better. You spend a lot of time talking to everyone else, but so little time talking to you, talking to yourself, listening to that voice you have in your mind. Second, you get to appreciate the simplicity of life. Even when nothing grand happened during the day, you learn how to be grateful for simple things like cooking healthy food or cleaning the house. Third, you record your achievements and you build up self-confidence by having something you can always go back to and reminding yourself, I did this and I did that. And actually, my life is not that uninteresting. If you look back on those pages, you realize that there were little moments of hope and little moments of achievement that are worth celebrating. And fourth, you reflect on what you take for granted if you sometimes ask the right questions. So if you're constantly living without asking yourself, what is it that I'm feeling? What is it that I'm experiencing? How is it that I'm changing? You might never experience growth. So you have to ask yourself questions, and then sometimes you might also realize that your answers to those questions change as you grow and as your values change. And finally, which I think is the most beautiful and poetic thing about journaling and about facing yourself, is that you learn how to structure in language and communicate your intricate, delicate, and expansive emotional and thought words. You learn how to identify the connections between emotions, thoughts, and actions, and slowly, hopefully, experience behavioral change. That's growth to me. And that's why you should start journaling today. They're coming, guys, they're coming. A bunch of pigeons interested in journaling. Just as a proof that there were actually pigeons interested in journaling there. See? Journal.